All right, so for your test, make sure you know everything from the quiz plus all of the factoring stuff. So factoring, completing the square, quadratic formula, and discriminant. So what we did in 1.4. So it's everything from the quiz and 1.4. So let's look at number 1. This question's from the quiz. It says write an equation of the parallel and perpendicular line with the given info. So we're going to start with finding the parallel line. So for number 1, what would I have to do first? Get y by itself. We want to find the slope. Always step 1 is to find the slope. So I'm going to subtract 6x and add 9 to move it to the other side. So 3y is equal to negative 6x plus 9. Then what do we do? Divide everything by 3. So y equals negative 2x plus 3. What's our slope here? Negative 2. So if our line is parallel, first we're going to find the parallel line. What does that tell us about the slope? Same slope. So we're going to use the same slope. We don't have to change it. So we're going to use this slope and this point. So we're going to plug it into point slope form. So y minus y1 would be y minus 2 is equal to m. So negative 2 times x minus x1. So that would turn into plus 3. Let's say that this question said that your answer has to be in slope-intercept form. What would I have to do? Distribute. So just like the question on the quiz said, your answer had to be in slope-intercept form. So let's distribute. We get negative 2x minus 6. Then we're going to add 2 to move it to the other side because we want to get y all by itself. So y is equal to negative 2x minus 4. So either one of these answers would work depending on what form it asks. We have point slope and slope intercept. But these are both lines that are parallel to the given line. Next, let's find the line that's perpendicular. What does perpendicular mean? Opposite reciprocal slope. So what's the opposite reciprocal of negative 2? Positive 1/2. So now the slope we're using is 1/2. So the slope that we're going to plug into our equation of the line is 1/2. So I have y minus y1. So y minus 2 is equal to 1/2 times x plus 3. So this would be an okay answer if it didn't tell us what form we had to leave it in. But if the question said to leave your answer in slope-intercept form, what would we have to do? Distribute. So we distribute the 1/2 to the x and the 3. So y minus 2 is equal to 1/2 x plus 3/2. What would I need to do next? Add 2. What do I do to add a fraction in a whole number? Make a common denominator. So that would change this to be 4/2. Then we add the numerators together, which gives us 7/2. So these are two lines that are perpendicular. But the first one is point slope. And the second one is slope intercept. Number 2, you have to do the same thing, but instead it gives you 2 points. So given the 2 points, what's the first thing that we have to do? What's the first thing we did in the last one? Find the slope. So same thing with number 2. You're doing the same exact thing, but you just find the slope given 2 points. So what would we have to do to find the slope? The slope formula. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. let's take a look at number 3. It says write the equation of the circle in standard form that has the endpoints of its diameter as follows. So these are the two endpoints of our diameter. For our circle equation, we need the center. So our circle equation is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared is equal to r squared. So we need to find our center, which is h and k. And we need to find our radius. So if I'm given the two endpoints, how do I find the center? The midpoint formula. So our midpoint formula is x1 plus x2, so negative 6 plus negative 10 over 2, and then y1 plus y2 over 2, 5 plus 7 over 2. So this would be negative 16 over 2 and 12 over 2. So our midpoint would be negative 8, 6. So this is our h and k. Now that I have my h and k, what would I do next? Use the distance formula. We're finding the distance of what? From the center to one of the endpoints. A lot of people on the quiz found the distance between the two endpoints, but that would be our diameter, not the radius. So we're looking for the distance from the center to one of the endpoints. So our distance formula is the square root of, we'll call this x1 and y1, and then we'll pick the first point and call it x2, y2. So x2 minus x1 would be negative 6 minus negative 8 squared plus y2 minus y1, 5 minus 6 squared. So this turns into a plus. So we have 2 squared plus negative 1 squared. 4 plus 1 would be 5. Now when we plug it into our formula, I have x minus h, which h we said is negative 8, so 8x plus 8 squared, plus y minus k, so y minus 6 squared. What's it going to be equal to? 5. Perfect. We take our radius and square it. You don't have to simplify your radius here. If you had something like square root 25, you don't have to simplify it because you just get rid of the radical when you plug it into your equation. If the question asks you what's the radius, then you would have to simplify if you're just naming the radius. But when you find it using the formula and you plug it in, you don't have to simplify because the radical ends up going away because it's r squared. So you're squaring the square root. It just cancels itself out. So this would be our answer to number 3. So for 5, 6, and 7, it says use the discriminant to determine the types/number of solutions. So our discriminant formula is b squared minus 4ac. So the discriminant only tells us how many solutions we have. It doesn't tell us what the actual solution is. And then in order to use the discriminant formula, it has to be equal to 0 first. So for number 5, what should I do? Subtract 10. And then when you put everything on one side, just make sure you keep it in standard form or rearrange it to standard form. So what's our A? 1. What's our B? And C? Negative 10. Perfect. Let's plug it all in. So we have negative 6 squared minus 4 times A, so times 1 times C, which is negative 10. Negative 6 squared would be positive 36. Be careful because that negative is being squared too, so it turns positive. And then we have negative 4 times 1 times negative 10. Positive 40. So 36 plus 40 is 76. So our discriminant is 76. That's part of our answer. That's just the discriminant. That's not our actual answer. That's not what x is equal to, but that's just our discriminant. How many solutions, if we have the discriminant of 76, what does that tell us? How many solutions do we have? 2 real solutions. So remember, because it's positive, we have 2 real solutions. So if your discriminant ends up being a positive number, you have 2 real solutions. If your discriminant is 0, you have 1 real solution. And then if your discriminant is negative, then you have no real solutions. All right, let's look at number 9. So it says solve by factoring. What should we do first here? Can we factor right away? What does it have to be equal to before we factor? Equal to 0. So I need to move everything. Which way do you think I should move things? I'm going to move the negative 3x squared and the negative 10x just to make my leading coefficient positive. So it'll just make it easier for us to factor when our leading coefficient is positive. We like it when it's positive. So let's add 3x squared to move it to the other side and add 10x. So we get 0 is equal to, when we write it, just make sure you put it in standard form. So 3x squared plus 10x minus 8. Perfect. When we start with a leading coefficient that's not 1, we have to multiply the first times the last. So what's 3 times negative 8?
24.
Negative 24. And what are 2 factors of negative 24 that add to 10?
6 and 4. Well, negative.
It would have to be positive 6 and positive 4 in order to add to 10, but that doesn't multiply to negative 24. Positive 12 and negative 2. Perfect. So we have x plus 12 and x minus 2. What do we have to do next? Divide. A lot of people on the quiz forgot to divide. So we divide. So we get x plus 4 times 3x, because if it doesn't divide, we move it in front of the x, so 3x minus 2. Now here we're not just factoring, we have to solve it all the way. So what would I do next?
X plus 4 equals 0.
Perfect. We set them both equal to 0. So x plus 4 equals 0. 3x minus 2 equals 0. So x is equal to negative 4. And then here we'd have to add 2 to move it to the other side and then divide by 3. So x is equal to 2 over 3. So those are 2 answers. All right, let's look at 10. 10, again, we're going to solve by factoring, but what should we do first? Take out an x. Always, always, always take out the GCF. It's going to make it easier for you to factor. So our GCF here is an x. My x just doesn't go away. It's going to go on the outside. When you take out the GCF that's a number, you can divide everything by that number and it'll go away. But if your GCF is an x, you need that x as part of your answer. If you just throw it away, you're losing a solution. So because our x is cubed, this tells us that we're going to have 3 answers. So we can't just get rid of that x. We got to leave it on the outside. When we take out an x, we're left with 6x squared plus 5x minus 4. What would we do next? Multiply the first times the last, we get negative 24. What are two factors of negative 24 that add to 5? 8 and negative 3, perfect. So here we have x plus 8 and x minus 3. What do we have to do next? Divide by 6 before we set it equal to 0. Do not forget, if you multiply the first times the last, you have to remember to go back in and divide. Can we simplify our fraction here? What does it simplify to? It would be 4 over 3. And then we're going to move the 3 in front of the x. So it'll be 3x plus 4. What about our second fraction? 1 over 2. So we're going to move the 2 in front of the x, and that 1 stays there. So 2x minus 1. Any questions so far? So simplify your fractions before you move the denominator over. Now what do we do? What do we do to solve? Set each piece equal to 0. So don't forget that x that we took out in the beginning, we have to set that equal to 0. We have 3x plus 4 equals 0, and 2x minus 1 equals 0. Then we just solve each little equation. X equals 0, it's already solved, so that's one of our answers. And the next one, we're going to subtract 4. 3x equals negative 4 and divide by 3. So x is equal to negative 4 over 3. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add 1. 2x is equal to 1. Divide by 2. So x equals 1/2. So those are 3 solutions. We had x cubed as our highest degree, which tells us that we need 3 answers. We've got 1, 2, 3. Next, we're going to solve by completing the square. So let's look at 13. What should I do first for 13? Add 5x squared, move it to the other side, and put it in standard form. So 5x squared minus 10x plus 65 is equal to 0. What would we do next? Take out the GCF. What's our GCF? 5. If my GCF is just a number, can I get rid of it? Yes. You can divide 0 by 5, it goes away. So we have x squared minus 2x plus 13 equals 0. Now the direction said solve by completing the square. So we have to complete the square here. What would I need to do first to complete the square? Subtract the 13. We want our x's on one side and the number, the constant, on the other. So x squared minus 2x. We're going to leave a space to complete the square equals negative 13. What's the little formula that we use to complete the square? B over 2 squared. B over 2 squared. What's our B? Negative 2. So negative 2 over 2 squared. What's negative 2 over 2? Negative 1 squared. And what's negative 1 squared? Positive 1. So I'm adding 1 into my equation here. What else do I have to do? Add it to the other side. What's going to go into my parentheses squared here? Awesome. X minus 1. And then what's that going to be equal to? Negative 12. So what would we have to do next? Awesome. We're going to square root both sides. I'm going to rewrite it over here so you have more room. So x minus 1 squared equals negative 12. We're going to square root both sides. So the square root cancels out the squared. So I'm left with x minus 1 is equal to what? What do I have to do when I take the square root of both sides? Plus or minus the square root of negative 12. Can I take the square root of negative 12? What would I get if I take the square root of negative 12? An I. What does I stand for? Imaginary. So what do you think my answer is here? No real solution. But if, let's say that was a positive 12, we would want to simplify our radical. We would want to add 1 to move it to the other side. So x is equal to 1 plus or minus square root of negative 12. And then we would want to simplify the square root. If it was a positive 12, we'd want to simplify it. But because we have a negative under our radical, it is no real solution. All right, last question we are going to solve using the quadratic formula. Which one do you want to do? 14, 15, or 16? Let's do 15. What would I need to do first for 15? Add x. Make sure you put it in standard form when you rewrite it. So we have 5x squared plus x minus 2 equals 0. And just to refresh our memories, our quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So what's our a? What's our b? 1. And what's our c? Negative 2. So let's plug everything in. We have negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 5 times negative 2 over 2 times 5. Then we're going to simplify the top, which is simplify going from left to right. So what's 1 squared? 1. What's negative 4 times 5 times negative 2? Perfect. Just multiply 2 at a time if you need to. Negative 4 times 5 would be negative 20. And negative 20 times negative 2 would be positive 40. Over 2 times 5, which is 10. And then what's the last step? Add the inside. So we get negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 41 over 10. Always check to make sure that you can simplify if you can. Can I simplify the square root of 41? No. So that would be our answer. Let's say we got something that ended up simplifying to negative 4 plus or minus 2 square root 6 over 4. Can I simplify this?
Yes.
How?
The 4s.
So when we simplify from our quadratic formula, you have to make sure that all 3 whole numbers are divisible by the same thing. So what are all 3 of the whole numbers divisible by? 2. So let's divide everything by 2. Not everything, just the whole numbers. So it turns into negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 6 over 2. Now we can't divide a whole number into the radical. You can only simplify if all 3 of your whole numbers have the same thing in common. You could possibly break this up and make it negative 2 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 6 over 2, but you don't have to do that. Just leave it like this. So if you wanted to split it up, you can, but you don't have to. I would just say leave your answer like this. Make sure you simplify as much as you can. So if you have a common factor in all of your whole numbers, you can divide that out. But then you can just leave it as a fraction if you still are left with a fraction in there. You can, so this would simplify to -1 plus or minus square root 6 over 2. So like that would also be correct. But what I'm saying is that you don't have to break it down further from here. You don't have to split it apart, just as long as all 3 of your whole numbers are simplified. So if you can divide them all by a common factor, simplify it that way.